Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is a legend of gaming who straddles both the tabletop and digital realms. He's worked on so many legendary titles that it would be too long to list them all, but they include designing credits on Call of Cthulhu and RuneQuest for the tabletop and Doom and Age of Empires digitally. He's currently the head of Peterson Games, most well known for publishing the physically imposing Cthulhu Wars. He's also a bona fide legend of the gaming world. My guest this week is Sandy Peterson. Sandy, welcome to the cabin.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm very well. So I guess my first question is how difficult was it for you to choose the 5 games to take to the cabin with you?
It was quite difficult because I had I'm going to turn the video on so you can see, even though the podcast can't, but you can see the wall behind me of games. And you can see it going clear off into the distance and off the distance the other way. And there's more games in other rooms in the house because I live for games. And so I had to restrict it to 5. So I had to think of games that weren't necessarily my favorites, but that I could keep playing eternally without getting bored.
And so was that the criteria that you chose?
That was my criterion, that they were games I could play for a very long time without getting tired of it. Because I have a lot of games that I like quite a bit, and I haven't played them enough to get tired of them, but I think I would if I was playing it relentlessly week after week. But if I play it once every 3 or 4 months or once a year, then it's not an issue, right? But so that was the games I picked. Games that I think it will be hard to get tired of.
And so from what I've seen, and the listeners haven't, you've got an incredibly big collection. And people always talk about the hobby being split up into 2 facets, the playing of the games and the collecting of the games. Are you someone who enthusiastically participates in both aspects?
Well, I guess I do, but the collecting is aimed at games I think I would like to play, so I think I'm more the player type. I don't get games just because it's an ancient classic that I feel I should own. Like, for example, I own almost all of the Cosmic Encounters ever published, but it's not because I must collect them all. It's because I like Cosmic Encounters, so every time it goes out of print and finds a new publisher, I get the new version.
To what degree do you collect games for a professional outlook? As a designer, I guess you have to keep up to date.
Probably that's at least 25% of the reason I get games. I often will get games from Kickstarter or elsewhere so I can look and see what they're like, see what they've done, see how they put things together. But then, like, ideally, they're also a fun game to play, and I'll do that. And I do buy plenty of games just to play them.
And so, how would you feel about, the apocalypse comes, you get these 5 games, you have to flee, and the rest of your collection is immolated. How would you feel about that? Are games something that you enjoy to have around?
I would be sad because... I don't know how to answer that. It would be terrible, but probably bigger on my mind would be the incineration of my book collection and my DVDs and everything else I have, unless those somehow mysteriously survived and all I lost was the games. That would be quite a strange apocalypse, though. Well,
it's a kind of a neutron bomb for games, maybe.
I guess I feel there'd be if it was actual apocalypse, I feel there'd be a bigger fish to fry than worrying about my games. But, like, for example, if my house was on fire and I had to rush out the door with just a few things I could save, probably none of the things I would save would be games. You know what I mean?
So I want to go back to the beginning then. So how did games enter your life? When did you first start playing? And did you come from a gaming family?
I did not come from a gaming family. I was the oldest son. My mom and dad didn't really play games, so my dad read lots of science fiction. About the age of 8 or so, I found out about games like Clue and um, and such. And then I started playing these, and I liked them so much I would stay in from recess to play games sometimes at school. And then my father got a copy of a game, and this is probably one of the reasons I got really interested in games. During the 100th anniversary of Gettysburg, of the Civil War, my dad bought a game called Gettysburg from Avalon Hill, which was a war game, and immediately the rules were lost. So all I had was this really interesting large map board of Gettysburg and a bunch of blue and gray cardboard counters with interesting numbers on them and the names of officers. And I would look at this and pore over it and try to figure out how this game would work and how you would play it and how it would be. And it was fascinating to me, and I'd go over it. And of course I never could figure it out. But eventually I found an actual for reals copy of it when I think I was about 11 at the time, 11 or 12. And then I was able to play it. And then I started getting into more than just, Stratego and such games and chess. And I started getting into board war games, which were the main advanced hobby game of the 60s and 70s. There was the Avalon Hill games, and some of my friends introduced me to strategy tactics. In 1974, Dungeons and Dragons came out, and I started playing that. But previously, even in junior high, when I was 12 to 14, I don't know what that would be for British schooling or Commonwealth, but I was creating games for conflicts that I couldn't find a game for. So we were doing World War I on the Eastern Front and weird things like that, making up our own miniatures game using our little Airfix models as the miniatures to fight each other. And in general, creating games and also buying and playing them. And this became a larger and larger part of my life. Role-playing games also was huge. When I got role-playing games, because my total amount of time for playing games was the same, role-playing games took up some of that, so there was less board gaming, but not zero. And then eventually, when I was in graduate school, games went from being an avocation to being a vocation. And then my entire adult life, from like 25 years old, age of 26 on, I've been a game designer as my profession, so I really don't know what a normal life is like.
And so do you think that you were somehow whether do you think this exists, a sort of natural game designer? It was just something you were naturally inclined to be good at?
I am on record as believing that this is not the case. And here's why. I think that there are people who have a natural talent to sing, or a natural talent to run or be athletic, or a natural talent for a lot of things. But game designing has so many different facets of a person that you have to use to do a game. And different designers use different facets. Like Reiner Knizia, I like the games he does, but he is about as different a designer than me as it's possible to be. Another example, people often talking about doing a legacy game. For some reason, I can't get my head wrapped around legacy games and how to properly do them, so I never have. My son did a worker placement game. I'm not up with that, but I'm really good at the strategy games and the co-op games and the role-playing games. So I think that there are probably 100 or 200 different aspects of your personality that can be used to make games, and you only need 40 or 50 of them to specialize in. So literally, I think every human being is complicated enough that if you worked on making a game, unless you had some crippling emotional deficiency, anyone could do a game. Now, I am better at doing a game than most people just because I've done it so long that I have gotten experience at it. It's how human beings work, right? If you do something for a long time, you get better.
And so do you think it's more akin to a craft than an art?
Absolutely a craft, not an art. And in fact, game designers, particularly in video games, who convince themselves it's an art and thus try to use artistic or political or whatever features in their game, make crappier games. So I think that unusually, if you treat it as a craft, then you could have games that in fact are art. But if you treat it as an art, you don't end up with either an art or a craft.
And so you talked about D&D. So do you think, I guess It's very interesting. I've been doing this now for about a year and a half, this show, and it tends to be, people tend to come from two schools, either Avalon Hill War Games or Redbox D&D, and it sounds very much that you're from both camps. How influential was D&D on you, and do you think you'd be the person you are today without it?
D&D, remember, I'm playing the very original terrible D&D game from the very first edition, where you couldn't figure out the magic rules. Nobody could figure out the magic rules. Where you couldn't figure out the combat system, where you weren't sure what % liar meant for the monsters, which it turned out it was the % that he'd be in a lair, but he spelled it wrong. It was liar. Where a kobold was considered a giant in the rules. And so we played this, and we were forced to make up all of our own rules. I think that was part of the advantage of that old game by Paradox, that we had to make our own rules. And we played it a lot, and it was super influential on me. It was the single most influential thing on me since starting to play the board war games, what got me into the harder core gaming stuff. So that was probably Avalon Hill probably had a bigger influence. But D&D was colossal, and even the fact that later on, as I would try other role-playing games, because I was used to playing other games from the board war game times. You wouldn't just play Panzerblitz, right? You play Panzerblitz, and then you play Blitzkrieg, and then you play Napoleon at War, or whatever it was. And then so role-playing games did the same thing. I played role-playing games, D&D, and I played something else. And I do the Fantasy Trip or Empire of the Petal Throne or Boot Hill or whatever. And then I would keep doing these other things. But I would always go back to D&D until I started playing RuneQuest. At the start of the year, I'd play about 50% D&D, 50% RuneQuest. And then by the end of that year, we were only playing RuneQuest because it completely displaced D&D from our minds, because everything D&D did, RuneQuest did in a way that we liked better. So, and then RuneQuest is what got me into being a game designer, because I started doing supplements for it. Then eventually I did Call of Cthulhu, essentially based on the RuneQuest core rules. And then that was the end of my life as a normal human being.
And so when did Howard Phillips Lovecraft enter your life? I was reading somewhere that you found a paperback of your dad's.
I did. I found a paperback of my dad's printed in 1942, and it was a military edition of Lovecraft for American soldiers to read while they're off fighting the Japanese, Germans, and Italians, I guess, And I'm not sure how that increased our morale, but I guess having lots of books around helped. But there was a lot of these books that were made for these soldiers, and one of them was Lovecraft. And I found this book in the basement in a box locked away when I was 8 or 9. And I got it out and read it, and I'd never read anything like that. I was one of those annoying, precocious kids that no one likes, that read a lot and was like a smartass. And so I read this book, and I'd read Poe and stuff, but this stuff was just amazing. And then that was the only Lovecraft book around ever. He was not in print. There was no other books I can get of Lovecraft, and I lost the book shortly after finding and reading the whole thing several times through. And at the age of 12, the guy I loaned the book to, which I'd forgotten about, came back into my life and he said, "Oh, here, Sandy, here's the book you loaned me." I got it back, and I go, "Oh, at last." And I had it again. And then when I was 14, the local college library was handing out library cards to like middle school and high school kids. And so I got one, and there in that giant college library, there was copies of the first editions of Lovecraft books. So I could check them out, and I finally read all those Lovecraft stories I'd never read before. And then a year after that, they found out that the first edition Lovecraft books were valuable, and they locked them away. And so once more, I was devoid of Lovecraft, except for that one ancient tattered book from 1942. And then when I was 17 years old, Ballantine released Lovecraft in paperback. And then from then on, he's been in print.
And so, do you remember the first Lovecraft story that really gripped your imagination?
Yes, it was Pickman's Model. And the second Lovecraft, I read it because it was the shortest one, because I was 8, and that's what and then the second one I read was The Outsider. And those are pretty different Lovecraft stories, but they're both creepy and interesting, and I didn't get The Outsider. There's sort of there's an ending with a sort of a surprise in it, and I did not understand what the surprise was. All I knew is I liked the story, and those amazed me. And those are the first ones I read, and The Color Out of Space really took over my imagination. The idea of a thing that came from outer space that was not a gas, not a monster, not a blob. It was just a color that interacted with people in a harmful way. I was really amazed by that.
Yeah, Lovecraft is the king of the italicized final sentence, and Pickman's model is the sort of quintessence of that Lovecraftian device.
Yes, and at the time I thought, well, I think this is supposed to be a surprise, but it's like obviously not.
Really obvious, yeah.
But later on, I finally learned figured out what Lovecraft was doing with those things, which is the problem Lovecraft faced, as any other author, is that he is the suspension of disbelief. When you're reading a book about monsters or ghosts or aliens or whatever, it's clearly bogus and you don't believe it, right? And so the author always has to convince you to believe it. And sometimes they do it by showing you evidence there's really monsters. They do different things, right? But Lovecraft's technique was unique in that what he did, he had his main character not believing in the monsters and making up ever more esoteric arguments against the monsters, how there can't possibly be real monsters. This is stupid. And then you, the reader, start saying, what a numbnuts. There's clearly monsters. Why can't this guy see it? And that's why the final ending of Lovecraft isn't actually for the reader, because he already knows. It's for the hero to be convinced. But the reader, your suspension of disbelief has been gone for a long time because you're spending all your time arguing with the hero in your head against his non-belief. And it's actually pretty clever and almost unique to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was completely taken with Lovecraft. And
the best thing about Lovecraft's technique is you don't have to know he's doing it for it to work. You can still totally make fun of the fact that the final ending's not a surprise. And yet the story worked.
So your first game then is Contract Bridge. So why are you taking this one to the cabin?
I'm taking Contract Bridge. And obviously the deal with Contract Bridge is that what it consists of is a deck of cards, a piece of paper, and a pencil, right? Or I guess I could draw it is when I was in my 30s, one of the guys at a company I went to said, let's learn bridge. And I said, sure, I've always grown up seeing the bridge column in the newspaper, and I know a lot of people play it. There must be something to it. Let's learn it. And we'd been playing other games at lunchtime, and Contract Bridge took over all of our gaming. And the thing that's cool about Contract Bridge is that because of the nature of the bidding and the nature of the play, it doesn't matter if you have a good hand or a bad hand, except for rare cases. Every hand is gripping, because if you have a bad hand, then the enemy, if they were smart, bid a really difficult contract to take. Like they may have to get all of the tricks or all of the tricks but one because they have such a good hand, which means your crappy hand, you only have to take one or two tricks to win and set them. Whereas if you have a monster hand of your own, then you are forced, if you're a good player, to bid super high so that, yeah, you have a monster hand that takes almost all the tricks, but if you miss just one, you're down. And so it's always an interesting fight. And also you can be good at it in a lot of different ways. You can be good at bidding, you can be good at defending, you can be good at playing a contract. So there's more ways of winning it than one. So there's that.
And so how good are you, and how often do you get this game to the table?
Terrible, and I hardly ever get to play it.
It's one of those games that's in the newspaper, and I think it's very famous for Omar Sharif being a very enthusiastic bridge player.
The game was great in the 1930s, you know.
And so what would you... But it seems to me to be incredibly arcane. What would you say to someone like me who's petrified of the game to get me to sit down at the table?
If you can play D&D, Contract Bridge is trivial by comparison as far as the rules, okay? There's a lot of stuff to learn. It's simpler than chess. Okay? It's only right? And the basics of it, maybe not the details of every single point value of things is complex to get, but the basics of how of what you're supposed to do. I'm trying to get 4 of a kind. I'm trying to get 5 of a kind. That is simple enough to get by. If you've played any kind of board war game or tabletop strategy game, it's simpler than those because it's made for ordinary people. but it bears in-depth playing. So that's my plug for Contract Bridge. It does have the limitation that you must have 3 other people who all know how to play it with you. And it's not the kind of game where you can sit down and teach them and then play it and have a good time. They all have to kind of know how to do it for it to be fun, which is an issue, right? You can't sit down and you can sit down with Cthulhu Wars and teach them all how to play, and they all play it and they have fun the first time. In Contract Bridge, that won't be the case. So there's that.
So I want to move on now and talk to you about, this was the first role-playing game I ever played, and it was the game that got me into reading Lovecraft as well, and this is obviously called a Cthulhu.
Now, I have a question for you then.
Yeah.
How was this your first role-playing game?
Yeah, I'd never played role-playing games before, and I was in a part of my life, I was living in a shared house, and one of the guys there said, "Oh, I've got this thing, do you want to join in?" And so we said one night, yeah, okay, let's do it. So he took The Haunting, I think, out of the back of the book, and he ran it. And the great thing about role-playing games is they can be sort of taught as you play. And yeah, from then on, I was completely enraptured by the whole sort of nihilism of Lovecraft's world. And it was through Call of Cthulhu that I found a love of Lovecraft.
Yeah, well, I've heard that from a lot of people, that Lovecraft. And the fact is, when I did Call of Cthulhu, I thought that it would be a super obscure cult game that 1,000 other people tops would play, because Lovecraft was virtually unknown in 1981 when I did it. And in fact, every single person I knew personally who had read Lovecraft had learned about him through me. So I was the only guy that read Lovecraft. And then so after releasing Call of Cthulhu, then I have had many thousands of people come to me over the years and say, I started reading Lovecraft because of Call of Cthulhu. So I guess, there's that.
Yeah. So what brought you to Chaosium, and why and how was Call of Cthulhu devised?
Well, what happened is that I had done some things for RuneQuest because a friend of mine had gotten me to write Greg Stafford directly because he knew him. And I had never thought of being able to write to a game company. That seemed unthinkable, right? But this buddy of mine, Steve Marsh, said, yeah, there's actual people at the other end of the phone. So I started, and so eventually did a book of monsters for them, did some cults for them. And in my book of monsters for RuneQuest, I had a bunch of Lovecraft monsters. And then this made them think of me. They decided, then later on, I contacted Chaosium and said, hey, I've got an idea. Why don't we do a supplement for RuneQuest, which is based on Lovecraft's Dreamlands as a world, because that was kind of a fantasy world that Lovecraft had. And they said, well, we don't want to do that because we're already doing a game of Lovecraft, set basically in the modern days. And I was like, whoa. And I had already done a game like that for my own use. I called it American Gothic, which was a modern horror story game, which I played a couple times. And I said, oh, can I help, or can I proofread? Can I review? Can I vet this other game you're doing? And they said, nah, we'll just let you do the whole game because we don't like how it's going. So suddenly I was they gave me the whole assignment. I found later on the reason they gave me the assignment was because I loved Lovecraft, so they knew I'd do a good job. I was obsessed with the topic, and I knew how to. They knew I could write because they'd seen other things I'd done. And I would write good enough anyway. And the third thing was that I'd never missed a deadline, so those things made them pick on me to do it. And one of the things that was very cunning about the Chaosium guys, and this shows their brilliance in a way that Hollywood, for example, would not have been able to pull it off, was that the guys at Chaosium shared the common opinion of Lovecraft, which is that he was a terrible hack from the 1930s that no one should read. They did not respect or like Lovecraft. But they also knew that because they didn't respect Lovecraft, they would not be able to do justice to a Lovecraft game. They knew I loved Lovecraft and that I would. And what you have usually in Hollywood, like if you give someone a superhero license or something and they don't respect superheroes, they just shab it out or they make fun of it or they're snarky. You know how they are, right? And they won't. And so so what will happen is the people that don't like that superhero won't watch it, and the people who do like it will be offended that you were snarky. This is how you get things like Batman and Robin, right? And so Hollywood often fails, but the guys at Chaosium said, he will do it right and we won't, and they gave it all to me.
And so you brought the game out, and it's a classic now, but what was the initial reception to the game?
It was immediately a success, and over the course of a couple years, it became our biggest seller at Chaosium. Part of that was because they fumbled RuneQuest, and they kind of, they, in conjunction with Avalon Hill, basically killed RuneQuest, but it was immediately a hit. Everyone loved it. It started to become, and at first it was a hit among other game companies and game designers. It became like the in thing to play, so that the people at TSR, for example, who did D&D, they weren't playing D&D in their house games. They were playing Call of Cthulhu.
And so I spoke to Kenneth Haidt a couple of weeks ago, and he repeatedly called Call of Cthulhu the King Lear of RPGs. What do you think it is about that game that makes people hold it in such high regard?
I think that the secret of Call of Cthulhu is that I am an obstinate contrarian in a lot of ways. And so I did everything backwards in Call of Cthulhu. In your typical role-playing game, you are a hero better than the common ruck of humanity who can triumph over the monsters and the demons and the dragons and the evil kings. In Call of Cthulhu, you are emphatically the underclass. And the weakest monster in the game is a cultist who is as tough as you, as smart as you, and probably better organized. You know, so that there's nothing there. Everyone is, and of course the monsters are worse. So instead of fighting them, you have to outwit them. You have to, the game isn't about beating up the monsters, obviously. It's about research and doing things. Your guy doesn't get better over time. They get worse and more crazy. And so all the features of a regular role-playing game are suddenly removed from you, and you have this whole different experience. And so part of the effect of this is that if you want to play a game where you're the tough guy and you triumph and you kill the monsters and you get better, there is a whole lot of games you can play like that. Literally every role-playing game. But if you want to play something that's different, then there's pretty much only Call of Cthulhu. And in fact, the other games like Chill and such that tried to emulate the horror thing, they did it by doing the regular, you're a tough guy, you're better than the average person, you're fighting and killing the monsters. And so they were replicating the D&D experience in a sense. And Call of Cthulhu wasn't.
And so do you think the strength of Call of Cthulhu is that if you ever fight one of the monsters, you're going to die very quickly, so it encourages a different sort of thought process while playing?
I think so, because the game master is forced to figure out things for you to do besides fight. For example, he has to give you like what I tried to replace. I knew that fighting was a major part of role-playing games, and I needed to replace it with some other activity. The activity I chose was investigating and finding out secrets. Well, that means the game master has to find out secrets. If you're playing D&D and you want to have an adventure, it's really easy for the game master to say, "Here's a bunch of ogres," you know. But it's not so easy to say, "Here's a bunch of clues that will lead you towards finding out the secret of the mummy's hand." And so the game master is forced to think more. The players are forced to think more. There's creepy stuff going on, which everyone's kind of involved in and being scared of them, and which is cool. And I think that is all stuff. I think that's one of the things that also made Call of Cthulhu successful, was because it wasn't all about getting stronger and tougher and beating up things. For whatever reason, this appealed to a lot of women, because women like horror stories too. And so if you played Call of Cthulhu, you were likelier to have a girl sit next to you at the table. That sounds crass, but it's actually true. So, and you know, for people to like that kind of thing, then it's just the kind of thing you'll like.
So your next game then is a digital game, and this is the Culdcept Saga. But this is...
maybe it violated your rules. I don't know. Sorry about that.
No. Absolutely anything goes. So this is a video game, but it's kind of like a mix between a CCG and a board game. So why are you taking this one to the cabin?
Culdcept Saga is a mix between a collectible card game and like Monopoly. And it is, the reason I'm taking this is because of all the video games I've played, which is a lot since I worked in the video game field from 1988 till 2012. It has the most depth, bar none, of any video game. Not the best art, not the best programming, but the depth of that game and the amount of things you can do and try out are there's so much. I am in awe at what they did to produce this game.
And so how does this depth manifest itself? In what way?
It manifests itself in the interaction between the decks that you can build and how the decks interact with the tabletop game, where you're literally going around on a track. They have multiple tracks. You're going around on tracks and passing go and getting money and buying properties and invest. It's very Monopoly-like. You buy properties and invest and try to bankrupt the guy. And you also put monsters on the property, and to capture a property from someone else, you attack them with your monsters.
And so, yeah, and so this has been certainly a modern trend to digitize board games.
So it's a combination of a board game and a CCG in a way that you couldn't really do in reality. That it would be too complicated. So that's kind of what I like too.
And so how do you feel that digitization of board games works? Do they work when you put them on a computer, or, is there something missing about the interaction with people around a table?
Missing exactly, but if I'm going to play I can play board games. I don't need to go online to do it unless I can't find opponents. I mean, I have a lot of people right now on Tabletopia playing my game Hyperspace. So that's how they play it, and they can do it that way. And I've had people offer to digitize Cthulhu Wars, which I'm not opposed to. But I think in general, I'm fine with the idea that if you're trying to play, well, let me put it this way: you play D&D, I assume.
Yes.
Okay. And if you play World of Warcraft,
I have very briefly.
So World of Warcraft is an attempt to bring a role-playing game like D&D to the digital world, but it's not the same game as D&D. It's not worse. It's just different. When there's not a game master, there's the world you're going up against. But for example, in World of Warcraft, you can go and find other guys to go with you on a quest, and you're all kind of you're all kind of co-equals. Whereas if you're playing your home game at D&D, it's always the same guys. It's your buddies that are playing the game with you against the game master. So, but you have those same buddies. So it's not the same exactly, but there's overlap. But World of Warcraft is doing things that a digital game could do better. But with D&D is doing things that a tabletop game with your friends, I think, can do better. So you have it's just a different genre, and it can be mimicked and treated similarly. There's probably if you set up a digital game to precisely represent D&D with the game master and all the players and stuff, then yeah, you'd have D&D. But it's sort of that would be a very expensive way to replicate something that you can do with paper and pencil, So.
And so I want to go on then. I want to talk about your digital design. So firstly, how does someone whose job is pen and paper role-playing games go over to the digital game side?
Well, what happened is that it turns out that if you're a designer, the basic rules of design, while there's differences between designing board games and role-playing games and digital games, it's not that different. That if you're good at one, you can be good at the other, generally speaking. At least going from board games to video games works. Maybe not always going the other way. And so what happened is that the company Microprose Software was looking for more designers to back up their programmers because that they could increase the number of games they did. And so what they started doing is they were hiring people from the board game field and the role-playing tabletop field to go into the company. And I got recruited by Lawrence Schick, who used to work for TSR, into going there. And because I was penniless working for Chaosium, the money was not there. And so I went to work for Microprose, and it was a little bit more remunerative. I didn't actually start hitting what I would call decent money until I left Microprose to go to id Software and made Doom and Quake and like that. And then I was able to do things like build my own house and that was awesome. But that's where it came from.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I've watched videos on sort of the history of video games, and the scale of video games right from the beginning seems to dwarf board games.
Oh yeah, there's much more money in video games. But here's the thing. I was making video games for id Software and for Ensemble Studios, and we were doing games that sold in the tens of millions of sales, right? Well, of that money, a bunch went to our publisher. And then of the money that trickled through to the game, a lot went to the owners. And then there was 70 or 80 guys in the company working on the game. And so even though when I sell Cthulhu Wars and it makes like $3 million, that's a lot less than the 50 or 60 or $100 million I'm making with Age of Empires 3. But I see a lot more of it.
And so you went on to design one of the bona fide classics of video games, which is Doom. How did you get on the team to design that game?
They didn't like their current designer, whom I will not name. They thought that he did not have what it took to do a really horrific game. And the programmers at id Software said, game designers are bad because we don't like our game designer. We don't want a game designer. We want an artist to come and do the levels for this game. I was like one of the first level designers ever. We didn't even know to call him level designer. And so the artist said, no. We want a designer. We just think that the designer we have now isn't the right one. So they decided to try me out. I didn't even know I was being tested. So they briefly had an artist come in and do some levels, and then they had me come in. And after a week there, I had done like a whole level they could go play in that had creepy noises and stuff and shadows. And the artist had done a stairway. But it was a really good looking stairway. and then they were kind of really impressed, and they said, yeah, we want this guy. And then I did most of the levels for Doom 1. In fact, I did all the levels in the second and the third episode, and 2 of the levels in the first episode. So I always did a lot of stuff. And then, in Doom 2, I did more than half the levels, and I just kept producing stuff. And So yeah, they were convinced that our game designers were good, and then we kind of together invented the concept of the level designer. And now level designers have gone far beyond what I was able to do, because now modern level designers are like half artist, half programmer for scripting. Plus they have it's become a whole new thing. I was just trying to do it out of my head, but yeah, so that was where that came from. They were trying to see if game design even had a place in the modern game, and it turned out that we still did.
And so I read, so when I was researching this, that you had an input into the creature design in Doom, and it was very Lovecraft oriented. Yes.
I kept sticking more things in, especially Quake, where I actually got shoved Niggurath in, and a Gug as the boss Chthon. So I kept sneaking these in. All my games, I tried to sneak in a little Lovecraft reference. So even my game, Age of Empires 3, The War Chiefs, I snuck in a Lovecraft reference, because one of the scout Indians you can randomly get, you get scouts from Indian tribes, and one of the random scouts is from the Miskatonic tribe. And I almost got caught on that one, as the other guy said, what's this Miskatonic tribe? I haven't heard of it. I said, it's an obscure back east Indian tribe. And they go, okay. So it made it in. So you can see the Miskatonic tribe sometimes.
And so you did one of the definitive role-playing games. And then you went on and you basically defined a genre of digital game. How does it feel when you look back to think, my God, I've got on one side Call of Cthulhu and Doom on the other?
Well, I'll tell you what happened is that in 2012, I said, I have a really awesome resume of stuff that is quite impressive, and I'm invited to conventions all the time as a guest, and because people have seen impressed by it, and I'm not sure if I got on all those things by luck or by skill, probably a little of both, but I said I should play this off to found my own company and take advantage of the fact that I'm this guy. And so that's where my current game, Peterson Games, come from. So I'm very happy I had all that stuff, because it enabled me to found Peterson Games and make it into a thing.
So your next game then is the game with possibly the most fascinating cover art I've ever seen. And this is World in Flames. How well do you think this game conveys the Second World War?
This game I played a lot of World War II games, starting with playing them when I was 12 years old. And of all the games I've played, this is my favorite because it has two parts of it. First of all, it has politics before the war starts. So if you can, for example, as the British fail to sell out the Czechs with the Munich Accord and have the Czechoslovakia be one of the countries at war. Of course, usually you pay for that by having like the Dutch go fascist or something, right? There's a trade-off. But the other thing is that it has all the countries. You know, you can go to war with, it has the Chinese troops. It has the war in Finland and Norway. It has everything there. And it also is a forgiving game in that if you make a horrible mistake, that while this puts you at a disadvantage, it doesn't end the war, and you can keep holding out, waiting for someone else to make a horrible mistake and get back up. So I like that. So
and is this game, do you think, a simulation of the war, or is it somewhere where you can participate in all those sort of delicious counterfactuals?
It's, you know, I mean, I can invade England with it in it, you know, as Germany, and that's cool. I've taken the Suez Canal as Japan. So you can do all kinds of wacky things that are hard to do. As one example, in one of the games, I decided I was going to try to take Gibraltar, and without attacking Spain first. And the conquest of Gibraltar in that game, I was the Axis powers. I came in there, I was landing paratroops, I was invading from the sea, I was doing all this stuff, and it was this tough 6-month-long campaign. And I finally pulled it off, partly because the reinforcements from England were torpedoed in the Bay of Biscay by my subs, and they didn't make it there. And I finally got Gibraltar, but I finished got it. I said, you know, that seems like what it might have really been like to take Gibraltar. It wasn't this easy, I'll get Gibraltar. The same like in a lot of World War II games, that's it. The Germans just have to think of it. In this, it was a hard fight, land, sea, and air, and I pulled it off, and I could have failed. And I felt that it was a real campaign. So that was what I liked about it.
And so what are war games for? Are they to educate? Are they for recreation? Are they for simulation? Or is it something else?
Because I'm a fan of reading military history, I think that part of it is that having a war game seem to be accurate is part of the fun for me, where I feel like I'm doing I'm being the Allies crushing the Axis powers or whatever it is. So I like that part. That is part of the fun, that I feel that it's realistic. But I'm not doing it to be educated necessarily. I mean, I think there's a little of it there. Like when I did the war games that I did, the real-time strategy games for Ensemble Studios, where I did Age of Empires and Age of Empires 2 and Age of Empires 3, all of these have educational aspects, but they have them because we think it's more fun if they seem educational. So I had people write me and say, hey, I got a good score on my history test because I knew what Hittites were because I played Age of Empires. You know, so it's like, okay, great. You know, I'm glad they learned that. But always we did the games with the thought that education was first. Not education, entertainment was first. And that the educational aspect was in there because it made it more entertaining, and we never were trying to teach our people. You know, look, you've seen movies where the director was didactically trying to teach you some point, right? Remember how much you hated those?
Right, absolutely.
Even if you agreed with the point he was making. Of course, if you didn't agree, it was even worse, right? But so I always remembered that and said, if I teach them something, that's awesome, but I won't teach them a thing if they don't like it. So first is they have to like it. So
I want to go on now, and I want to talk about another aspect of your life and how it relates to your gaming. So you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints, and in interviews you've said that there is no conflict between the sort of violent nature of the games you produce and your religious faith. How do you explain that?
Evil is part of the world, and and it's always around us. Orson Scott Card pointed out, he said people have from the same church I belong to have said, oh, well, you shouldn't have the bad people in your stories because that's bad. And he said, look, if I had a story with no conflict and no evil, nobody would read it because it would not be realistic, because the actual world has those things constantly around us. In Doom, you're fighting demons. I got dinged by some people because there's demons, and I'm like, you're like not on their side, right? They're not real. Let me tell you, the one time I've used my Latter-day Saint status to do something. We're doing Quake Okay. And one of the things in Quake is they put images of Christ in the dungeons, and I'm okay with that. I don't mind the images of Christ, you know. But one of the actually was John Romero. He had a button that you'd press with a picture of Jesus' face on it, which I'm also fine with, and he put it on the floor, so you had to step on Jesus' face to open this door. And I went to John and I said, "Hey, John, I know that you're like a total atheist and all that, which is fine. I didn't care, you know." I said, "But it bothers me when I'm testing your level and I hesitate before stepping on Jesus' face to open the door. I'm thinking you just used it because it was a convenient texture and it didn't have to be Jesus' face." And he said, "Oh my gosh, you're right." And he changed it. So I didn't have to. So that's not in the game anymore, right? But that was like one of the few times it's come into play.
And so, I mean, obviously you lived through the Satanic Panic and you were one of the people in the industry that was under attack from a lot of religious people in the States.
Let me just make it clear. It is not just the right wing that attacks my stuff. The people that held up my games in Congress and denounced them were Democrats. Joel Lieberman, they held up Doom and said, "This makes people be killed." And those were not, so it's both sides. It's people who don't understand them.
And so, I mean, did you get any blowback from your community, from your family, because of what you were doing?
It helps that my church is not actually very regimented in terms of that kind of doctrine. And so usually the reaction I got from members of my church was, "Hey, can you get me free copies of Doom?" But there were obviously people that opposed it.
And so what do you say to those people? Because it's come up again recently and, you know, Trump has come out and said it's video games that do it. What do you say to those people who attribute the violence?
Trump was following in the wake of the Democrats who were doing it all through the 90s, I guess. I guess I say that a healthy imagination is good and probably leads to less violence over the long run. One of my friends who defended against the people who hated D&D and made the point. He said, "Look, we know what causes teen suicide. Okay, the three main factors are that you don't have friends, that you don't have very much imagination, and that you're bad at problem solving. That's what makes you commit suicide, right? And bad at problem solving stands to reason, right? No imagination, they can't think of another way out of it." And he says, all of these things, playing D&D specifically is an antidote to. It teaches you problem solving, it teaches you imagination, and it gives you friends. So people that play D&D logically should have significantly less cases of suicide, and in fact, they do.
So to what extent does your faith influence your work, or do you like to keep them separate?
I like to think that my faith is constantly influencing me in little ways all through it. I mean, I try not to have prurient things in the games. Someone with an exposed breast, I try to make it be artistic instead of sexy. You know, so for example, the game Kingdom Death Monster. I'm not condemning him. He's not a Latter-day Saint like I am, right? So he does what he wants, but he has a lot of very sexy images, whereas in my game, The Gods War, there is a look. She looks like a Bronze Age queen, and she has one exposed breast, but it's done in a non-seductive way. It's just part of her outfit. So there's that aspect.
And so, gaming, tabletop gaming seems to be very popular with people of faith in the States. Why do you think that is?
I think it might just be because people in the States are likelier to have faith than people in England nowadays. I think we have a higher percentage of faithful people, you know, and also I think that board games are a fun, cheap way to enjoy yourself. And I mean, I guess I hadn't heard that remark before, so I'm doing male answer syndrome and trying to respond to that.
Yeah, this is just a viewpoint I've seen in consuming board game media that it seems to. There's a lot. Well,
I think part of it might be that some people who are very strong on the left, like, are always amazed whenever they see a right wing person liking something they like, because they want us to be. I'm a little bit right wing, but they want us to be completely different in every way from them, and like we're all humans, you know, and we really like the same things. You know, we like, and part of it too might be that if you are a faithful person, you are as likely or maybe likelier to have children and relatives and family reunions and groups of people that are your friends that you hang out with. There's a slight tendency that way, I think, because you have all the guys at church that you know, you have your family. And so these are all people, and I play games with my nieces and my nephews and my kids and now my grandkids. And all these people are part of my gaming array that is available to me. And even if they don't play games with me, they're playing it with each other because they know Uncle Sandy has these cool games.
So your next game is another one of these cool games, and this is one of yours. And this is Hyperspace. So what's the inspiration for Hyperspace?
The inspiration for Hyperspace was reading science fiction books as a kid in which the aliens would share planets. They'd all be these wacky different aliens. Another influence of it is the game Cosmic Encounter, where all the aliens are really different psychologically and strange. And I never liked science fiction movies or books where the aliens weren't really alien. I'd read a lot of science as a kid, and I still do. And humanoids are really rare. Like there's one on Earth, right? And none of the other creatures are humanoids. So I wanted aliens that were based off, bacteria or fungus creatures, or that weren't anything like us, that didn't think like us, didn't act like us, that traveled in time or lived in a vacuum or all these things. And so Hyperspace, I wanted to have all these really wacky aliens interact, and that's what I did in Hyperspace. And also because of some clever victories in game design in doing it, I was able to get 25 different alien races that were all really weird and asymmetrical. And so of my games, I think it bears a lot of replay. And it's pretty quick to play, too. So, ask me again in 5 years, the Hyperspace may no longer be on this list. But at the moment, I've seen a lot of people play it. And it hasn't come out yet, but it's being produced and it's not delayed. And so there it is.
And so, yeah,
also, one more thing. When I was a kid playing games of make-believe with my friends, we made up aliens to be, and those aliens made their way into Hyperspace. So there's some of my 14-year-old self in it.
And so, you talked about this. Many of your games have asymmetry as a sort of core idea in them. Why is asymmetry good in games?
Asymmetry is good in games because in the very basic level, if you're playing a game with only two players, like say you're playing Axis and Allies, and there's two sides. One of the sides is the Axis, one is the Allies. It's asymmetrical because of their setup. That means that you can play that game twice as much as a game like checkers, where they're the same. And it's a different game for those two times. And the more asymmetry you have, the more different times you can play that game and go back and get stuff out of it. So if you're playing my game Orcs Must Die, the asymmetry there is in the heroes act differently. Well, that gives you lots of asymmetry, though. As I'm playing the game with 3 different heroes than I did before, suddenly the game feels different. I'm making different decisions. I'm doing different things. And that's why I like asymmetry, for the replayability and also for the mental fun of trying to figure out what I need to do this time to win, because it's going to have to be different from last time, and learning what you're supposed to do, learning the tricks.
And so to what degree is Hyperspace a Sandy Petersen design, and in which ways is it sort of original, breaking new ground for you?
I guess I thought the Sandy Petersen designs were my original things.
But I mean, the facets of the design.
Ways it's different that I'm very proud of. One is that I have so many more different... Okay, here's one. I made a breakthrough in my game design, and that for the first time I made a game that doesn't have an upkeep or a production phase or like any kind of thing that stops play cold while you're totting up points or something. None of that in Hyperspace. You just take your turn, you do your 3 actions, whatever you want, then it's the next guy's turn, then it's the next, and it goes around and around, and it never stops till the game ends. There's never any, like a lot of the games I do and other people do, there's a point where you have to stop and do some kind of like bookkeeping in the game, and it sort of stops play cold. And Hyperspace doesn't have that. You just keep going. It has races that do things beyond what I've done in my other games, races that change the map permanently, or that travel in time, or that their planets blow up, or more extreme things than I've seen before in some ways. I think one of the things that is very Sandy Petersen-y about it is that all the races don't just have advantages, they have flaws, like they have outright handicaps, and it says this is your weakness, that you have this bad thing. And I've noticed that players have really taken ownership of the bad things, and they seem to like it. They say, oh yeah, my guy has this disadvantage. It's pretty cool. So that was a discovery of mine in some previous games, and I'm putting it in all my games now because it's been such a hit, and it's kind of an amazing feat. Just like the Sanity thing, I didn't think would turn out the way it was in Call of Cthulhu, but it was a huge hit, and so this having a weakness thing, I'm milking that for all I got.
So I want to talk now sort of about your current life and your future life. So you run Peterson Games, and this publishes Cthulhu Wars. Were you surprised that Cthulhu Wars was such a wild success as it was?
Yes, I was actually in the process of taking a job in India and going to work with a video game company there. And I said, before I go to India, I'll do this little Kickstarter for Cthulhu Wars and make about $200,000, $300,000 to help support me while I go off to India. And instead, it was like $1.4 million. And then it's gone on to make $3 more $1 million Kickstarters after that, and it completely transformed my life. I was doing Cthulhu Wars as the ultimate Sandy Peterson game, the game I wanted to do that was exactly my personal game. I didn't care who else would like it. I thought somebody else would, but it was just, that's why it has the giant figures. That's why it has all the monsters. It's my game, because that was going to be my swan song. My last game I would ever do, that was my idea. That was the intent. And instead, it made so much money that it became a phoenix instead of a swan, and rebooted me. And I founded this whole company. Now I'm doing games constantly.
And so you've got Hyperspace coming, and what else is coming from the company in the future?
What else we have coming from the company? Well, we're doing a lot of D&D stuff now. I don't know if you're aware of that. Based on a thing called Sandy Peterson's Cthulhu Mythos 4.5e. And we just recently finished a campaign for a campaign in D&D called Ghoul Island. It's going to be in 4 volumes, 60 or so pages each volume, and it is a complete campaign from like 1st to 15th level. And it's all with ghouls and monsters and Gatan Nathoa and people being mummified and deep ones. And it's a full campaign. And we're going to follow this up with more campaigns. Yig Snake Granddaddy, Spawn Dance, Dark Worlds. And each one is a 4-volume set of a full campaign, 1st to 15th level. We have these planned out for the indefinite future. Another thing we have coming very soon is a game called 8-Bit Attack, which is an inexpensive, like $25. I think it's $20 on the Kickstarter, $25. Which is a simple little game where every battle is a boss battle against an 8-bit looking enemy, and you're trying to eventually get to the point you can beat Cthulhu. A simple, straightforward little battle game. We have a game coming up called Dinosaur 1944, which is essentially dinosaurs versus army guys, set in World War II, and then, of course, Hyperspace will soon be in print. Planet Apocalypse will soon be in print. Planet Apocalypse is a co-op game about hell rising up and corrupting the world. There's a little bit of a religious background on that because, of course, every holy book talks about when the demons are going to come back and overthrow the world. So here they come. That's what it's about. You're the heroes trying to stop them. And also, you're not the elite cool heroes trained by the government, because those guys are all eaten by the demons. So you're like other ordinary people that are trying to stop them, which is, maybe that's a Call of Cthulhu thing more than a Mormon thing. But that's where it goes. So I've got the games keep going out, and I'm very proud of Peterson Games and what we've done. I think that our role-playing stuff is really good, and will impress people. And I think that if we can keep up the quality on our board games, and we're working. And we've already made the changeover. Our reputation used to be super high quality games that take a really long time to produce, so they're really delayed. And we're changing that, so they're super high quality games starting now, our games are no longer delayed. They come out on time, so we're really happy with that.
And so if you were to look back on your career, what would you say your legacy to the gaming landscape has been?
I think that I have a multi-part legacy. I think maybe the most important thing I've done, in a sense, is making Lovecraft a pop figure. when I went to Necronomicon, the convention about Lovecraft a few years ago, the guys there gave me a prize for like greatness in Lovecraft, a little award, and they said that Lovecraft is really well known today, and he wasn't in the 80s and earlier. And they say the reason he's known today is partly because of Call of Cthulhu going through the pop culture and the gaming nerds, and partly because of Stuart Gordon's movies, Reanimator or such, going through the movie realm, and that each of us deserve about 50% credit. And I would say that's pretty fair. So without Call of Cthulhu, Lovecraft would not be as well known. And I think the other thing is that I helped promulgate head-to-head gaming with computers. Before Doom, gaming was just against the computer. You didn't play against another person. And now almost every game you can play against another person. And that comes from Doom. That wasn't just me, but games are in fact a group effort. The best and most amazing artistic D&D things that ever happened were a bunch of guys in a room somewhere in the basement playing the game with each other. You know, it wasn't in what the game designer did. And that's what I've done. I've helped build up and make interactive entertainment instead of passive entertainment better for everyone.
And so your final game then is something that I've been trying to find a weekend to play for the last, well, since it came out, and this is Mega Civilization. Is this the definitive Civ game?
So far, you know, it has everything the original Civ game had, which is what I got it for, and more. And the way I got it, I walked up to the guy at Essenspiel and I said, I want a copy of Mega Civilization. And he said, okay. And I said, I'll trade you a Cthulhu Wars for it. We made the swap right there. I have no idea which one cost more, but we made the swap, and both of us walked away thinking we'd ripped off the other guy.
And have you managed to play with the full 18 players?
No. And I doubt, even if I took it to my desert island, I would do that if I had 18 players. It seems that would just take way too long, but maybe, you know, someday. But having random groups of 5 or 6 is still going to be fun.
So, I've got one last question. So you're heading out of the city, you're driving to the cabin, 88 miles an hour, and you go down the road, the car goes around the corner and the back door flies open. 4 of your games fly out of the car, down a ravine, into a river, and are swept away to eternity. Which game do you hope is sitting in the backseat of the car?
Who are the other people in the car with me?
That is up to you.
Is it egotistical, maniacal to say that I hope it's Hyperspace?
Absolutely not.
Because it's a tough choice. I would really like to keep World in Flames too, but I guess I can't.
4 of them are gone, I'm afraid.
You know what? If I have any one of them, I'll be happy. And I'm willing to let the gods of chance take their pick. These are all on a par in my mind.
Excellent. So if people want to contact you, see what Peterson Games are up to, how would they go about doing that?
I would say that you look for petersongames.com. And the way to find it is to spell Peterson with an E instead of an O. So it's not Peterson, it's Petersen. And also games is plural. So Peter, S-E-N, games.com, and you will find us. There is also a YouTube channel for Peterson Games and a YouTube channel for Sandy of Cthulhu, who's me, where I talk about games and movies and horror and role-playing and stuff. And you can get on our newsletter and get spammed about once every 1 or 2 weeks with what we hope is relevant information.
Well, Sandy Peterson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can support the show in many ways. You can tell your friends. You can talk about it on social media. You can talk about it in your own blog, podcast or video. Or you can support it directly by going to patreon.com/5G4D for a rolling donation, or for a one-off donation, hitting the PayPal link at the bottom of the website, 5gamesfordoomsday.com. It's these donations that keep the show going. Also, if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on @5gamesfordoomsday on Twitter, or you can send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. And if I've managed to pry myself away from the hamsters of doom and the feeling that I'm not being watched, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.